There's something deeply unsettling about small-town legends. The kind of stories whispered at sleepovers, passed down through generations. Stories that make you look twice at shadows and question what you thought you knew about the world. Most of the time, we dismiss them as fiction, as campfire tales meant to thrill and frighten. But what happens when you dig deeper and discover that some of these legends aren't legends at all? That beneath the exaggeration and folklore lies a kernel of truth so disturbing, so real, that it changes everything. Tonight, we're exploring 15 small-town legends that turned out to be true. Stories that started as whispers and ended as documented fact. Stories that remind us that sometimes the most terrifying tales are the ones that actually happened. So, settle in, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself for a journey through America's hidden history, where the line between legend and reality blurs until you can't tell them apart anymore. On a moonless summer night in western Pennsylvania decades ago, a group of teenagers parks on the side of a lonely country road not far from the small town of Koppel. They kill the engine and nervously honk the horn 3 times, daring a local legend to emerge from the darkness. According to the story they've heard since childhood, a glowing green ghost wanders these back roads, haunting anyone who crosses his path. Some say he's the spirit of a factory worker who fell into a vat of acid. Others claim he can stall cars with an electrical charge that still courses through his spectral form. The teens laugh uneasily, half certain nothing will happen. But deep down, each wonders the same question that has haunted this corner of Pennsylvania for decades. What if Charlie No-Face is real? It turns out he was real, just not in the way the spooky tales suggested. Charlie No-Face, also known as the Green Man, wasn't a ghost, but a flesh and blood person named Raymond Theodore Robinson. And far from being a vengeful spirit, he was a gentle, ordinary man who endured an extraordinary tragedy that would transform him into one of Pittsburgh's most persistent urban legends. Raymond was born on October 29, 1910, in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. His early childhood was unremarkable for its time. He grew up on the outskirts of Beaver Falls in what seemed like an ordinary life, one of at least 7 children in a household formed after his widowed mother remarried. But on a warm June day in 1919, when Raymond was just 8 years old, everything changed in a single, terrible moment. Raymond and his friends were out playing near the Morado Bridge, which carried trolley lines for public transportation. The boys had made a bet, a dare of sorts, to climb up the electrical pole and count how many eggs were in a bird's nest perched near the top. Raymond, wanting to prove himself brave, volunteered. He began climbing the pole, reaching higher and higher, his small hands gripping the metal framework. But as he neared the nest, he grabbed what he thought was a safe handhold. It wasn't. His hand closed around a live wire carrying 11,000 volts of electricity, enough power to run the entire trolley system. The electrical shock that tore through Raymond's small body was catastrophic. Witnesses said the flash was blinding, like lightning had struck the pole itself. The voltage sent him plummeting to the ground, his clothes smoldering, his body broken. When rescuers reached him, they were certain he was dead. No child could survive such trauma. But somehow, impossibly, Raymond Robinson was still breathing. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked frantically to save his life. They succeeded, but the cost was almost unimaginable. The electrical burn had destroyed most of Raymond's face. He lost both eyes, his nose, one ear, and his left arm was so badly damaged it had limited function. The skin that remained was severely scarred, leaving his facial structure fundamentally altered. For the rest of his life, Raymond would live with these devastating injuries, confined to a world of darkness, unable to see the faces of those he loved, or the beauty of the world around him. For the next 65 years, Raymond would sequester himself in his family home in Coppell, Pennsylvania. Unable to venture out during the day for fear of frightening people with his appearance, he spent his time making belts, wallets, and doormats, which he sold to generate a small income. His family loved him deeply, and those who knew him described Raymond as one of the kindest, most gentle souls they'd ever met. But Raymond craved fresh air and nature, the simple pleasure of being outside. So he devised a solution. When night fell and darkness blanketed the Pennsylvania countryside, Raymond would grab his walking stick and set out for long walks along State Route 351. He'd feel his way along the road, one foot on the pavement and the other on the gravel shoulder, to stay oriented. The isolated roads gave him the freedom to walk for miles, to feel the cool night air on his skin, to experience a small measure of the independence that had been stolen from him as a boy. Eventually, people noticed. Word spread through the community about the man who walked the roads at night, and soon enough, local teenagers would drive along Route 351, hoping for a glimpse of Charlie No-Face in the glow of their headlights. Raymond often wore green clothing, which combined with the way car headlights reflected off his shirts, gave rise to his nickname, the Green Man. The name stuck, spreading through the region like wildfire, taking on a life of its own. Over the years, the story twisted and evolved, as stories always do when passed from person to person, generation to generation. The truth about a kind man taking nighttime walks became something else entirely. According to the legend that developed, the Green Man was a ghost who haunted the Piney Fork Railroad tunnel. Some versions claimed his skin actually glowed green from the electrical shock he'd suffered. Others said he was dangerous, that he would chase away parked teenagers or stall cars that he touched. The legend grew darker with each retelling, transforming Raymond Robinson from a victim into a monster. Occasionally, people would stop to talk to Raymond during his walks. Some brought him beer or cigarettes, treating him with kindness and respect. Others were cruel, mocking him, or even assaulting him. There were times when people talked him into getting into their car, only to drive him miles away and abandon him, forcing him to walk back home in the darkness. He was struck by cars more than once, yet despite these indignities, Raymond never stopped his nightly walks. He never let the cruelty of others turn his heart bitter. By the 1970s, Raymond walked less frequently. Many of the teens who used to meet him had moved away, and the years were taking their toll. He spent his final years at the Beaver County Geriatric Center, where he died in 1985 at the age of 74. Those who had known him in person mourned a kind, brave man who never let his tragic injuries define his character. Meanwhile, many in western Pennsylvania didn't even realize the Green Man had been a real person, let alone that he had passed away. The legend had become so detached from reality that local papers felt compelled to run stories informing the public that Charlie No-Face had been real and that he was gone. Today, more than a century after Raymond Robinson's fateful injury and 40 years after his death, the tale of Charlie No-Face remains firmly embedded in the cultural memory of Pittsburgh and its surrounding communities. The story serves as a powerful reminder of how urban legends are born, how a real person's tragedy can be transformed into myth, and how important it is to look beyond the scary stories to find the truth beneath. Raymond Robinson wasn't a monster or a ghost. He was simply a man who wanted to take a walk. The legend of the Green Man will undoubtedly continue to roam the imaginations of Western Pennsylvanians for generations to come. But now you know the truth behind the tale. The next time you hear someone spin the yarn of the glowing man with no face, you can tell them that Charlie No Face was real, and his true story is more touching and more interesting than any ghost story could ever be. Speaking of urban legends that turned out to be terrifyingly real, let's travel from the quiet roads of Pennsylvania to the bustling borough of Staten Island, New York, where in the 1970s and 80s, children began disappearing. And the man who would come to embody every parent's worst nightmare had a name that would become synonymous with evil itself. For the kids growing up in Staten Island during the 1970s, Cropsey was the escaped mental patient who lived in the old abandoned Willowbrook State School. According to the campfire stories passed from child to child, Cropsey would come out at night to snatch naughty children who wandered too far from home. He had a hook for a hand in some versions, or burning scars covering his body in others. He was the boogeyman, the cautionary tale parents used to keep their kids out of abandoned buildings and home before dark. Just a story, just a legend. Except it wasn't. The tale is said to have begun sometime in the early 1970s at Staten Island summer camps, where counselors would spin variations of the Cropsey story to thrill and frighten their young charges. In one version, a once respected businessman named George Cropsey went insane after losing his family in a fire caused by an irresponsible camper. The legend emphasized the power of children's storytelling, how innocent tales could transform into something horrifying. Whether the legend was based on facts, inspired by headlines, or simply an urban myth remained to be determined. Until the summer of 1987, when 5-year-old Alice Pereira vanished from the Tysons Lane apartments. Alice was playing in the building's lobby with her brother on July 7, 1972, when she disappeared around 3:30 in the afternoon after her brother briefly left her alone. She might have been seen in a nearby park, but after that, nothing. No trace of the little girl was ever found. At the time of her disappearance, authorities initially believed her father had taken her, as Alice's parents were divorced. But he was later cleared as a suspect. Then, on August 14, 1983, 11-year-old Tia Hees Jackson was last seen leaving the Mariners Harbor Motel, just 12 days after a man named Andre Rand had been released from prison. At 1:30 in the afternoon, while Jackson's mother slept, another resident of the hotel sent the girl out to purchase chicken wings from a nearby supermarket. Tia Hees never returned. Her mother woke at 4:30 and immediately called police when she discovered her daughter had been missing for 3 hours. Andre Rand had a campsite at the Baron Hirsch Cemetery, less than half a mile from the hotel, and Jackson's mother said she'd seen a man matching his description loitering in the motel's parking lot. These weren't the only disappearances. 18-year-old Audrey Lynn Narenberg vanished in 1977. 42-year-old Ethel Louise Atwell, an employee at the former Willowbrook State School, disappeared in 1978. 22-year-old Henry Gafforio vanished in 1984. And as time passed without any arrests, Staten Island residents began to note that the disappearances eerily seemed to mirror the tales of Cropsey. The legend was coming to life, and fear gripped the community. Then, on July 9, 1987, 12-year-old Jennifer Schweiger, a girl with Down syndrome, was reported missing after she didn't return from a walk near her Westerly home. The search for Jennifer lasted 35 days and mobilized the entire community. When her body was finally discovered on August 25th, it was found in a shallow grave on the abandoned grounds of the Willowbrook State School, buried in the woods not far from where a homeless man had been camping. That man was Andre Rand. Andre Rand had been born Frank Rostam Rashan on March 11, 1944 in Manhattan. From 1966 to 1968, he worked as a custodian, orderly, and physical therapy aide at Willowbrook State School under the name Frank Bruchette. The institution, which had been opened in 1938 to serve as a home for disabled children, had become notorious for its horrific conditions. After it closed, Rand was reported to be homeless and had begun camping in the woods surrounding the abandoned institution. On May 5, 1969, Rand was arrested in the South Bronx for kidnapping and attempting to rape a 9-year-old girl. He'd enticed her into his car and driven to a vacant lot, where he removed his clothes and hers. A passing police car interrupted the crime. Charged with attempted rape, Rand pleaded guilty to sexual abuse and was sentenced to 4 years. He served 16 months, gained parole in January 1972, and legally changed his name to Andre Rand. By the end of the decade, he had logged 3 more arrests for minor offenses, including burglary. When Jennifer Schweiger's body was discovered in 1987, Andre Rand was arrested and charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder. The Staten Island jury couldn't reach a verdict on the murder charge, but convicted him of first-degree kidnapping. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. During the investigation, detectives learned disturbing details about Rand's possible involvement with the other missing children. Some people, along with detectives, speculated that Rand may have been involved with Satanism and had provided children to be sacrificed. Officers and inmates at the prison where Rand was incarcerated testified regarding conversations in which he allegedly bragged about his crimes. In 2004, Rand was brought to trial again, this time charged with the 1991 kidnapping of Holly Ann Hughes, a 7-year-old who had been playing in her yard when she vanished. Though her body was never found, Rand was convicted and sentenced to another 25 years to life. He became eligible for parole in 2008, but was denied. He remains incarcerated today and will be eligible again in 2037. The 2009 documentary Cropsey explored the connection between the urban legend and Andre Rand's crimes. The filmmakers, who had grown up on Staten Island hearing the Cropsey stories, returned as adults to investigate whether the legend had inspired Rand or whether Rand had become the real-life embodiment of a pre-existing myth. What they discovered was that the line between legend and reality had blurred beyond recognition. Rand so perfectly fit the image of the boogeyman that he might as well have been a monster out of central casting. Whether the legend created the man or the man became the legend may never be fully understood. Today, volunteers still search the abandoned grounds of Willowbrook twice a year, hoping to find the remains of the other missing children. The families of Alice Pereira, Tia Hees Jackson, and others have never had closure. Their children remain missing, their fates unknown. And on Staten Island, parents still warn their children about Cropsey, though now they know the legend was never just a story. It was a warning that should have been heeded. From the forests of Staten Island, our journey takes us south to Georgia, where another legend lurks beneath the surface of a popular recreation spot, quite literally. Lake Lanier, Georgia's largest lake, is a sprawling, beautiful body of water that touches 5 counties in the northern part of the state. On sunny days, it's spectacular, with lush green groves encircling sparkling blue water. Every summer, tens of thousands of visitors flock to its shores for boating, swimming, and relaxation. But beneath that peaceful surface lies a darker history, one that involves entire communities swallowed by water, unmarked graves, and a legacy of displacement that haunts the lake to this day. If you spend any time in or around Atlanta, you've likely heard tales of Lake Lanier. There are eerie accounts of fishermen seeing ghostly figures floating on the water, stories of women with no hands roaming the bridges, tales of good swimmers being snatched under the water by unseen forces, or vehicles crashing into the lake without apparent cause. Many folks who live close by will tell you straight up not to go to Lake Lanier, and with a death toll that averages 10 to 20 fatalities per year since its creation, their warnings carry weight. The most famous ghost story associated with Lake Lanier is that of the Lady of the Lake, also known as Delia Mae Parker Young. According to legend, on April 8, 1958, Delia and her friend Susie Roberts were on a late-night drive with some men when their car plunged off a bridge into the lake's cold waters. Both women drowned, but while Susie's body was recovered shortly after, Delia's wasn't found until 1959, and when it was discovered, both of her hands were missing. Ever since, locals claim to have seen Parker Young wearing the blue dress she borrowed that night from Roberts, wandering near the bridge with her handless arms, ready to snatch unsuspecting lakegoers and drag them to the bottom. But the real haunting of Lake Lanier has nothing to do with ghosts and everything to do with history. Before Lake Lanier existed, there was life in the valleys and along the riverbanks of the Chattahoochee. Communities thrived there, including the historically black town of Oscarville in Forsyth County. In the early 20th century, Oscarville was home to roughly 250 black families. The town bustled with life, featuring farms, churches, schools, and small businesses. The community had been established after the Civil War by freed slaves who fought for their freedom and managed to create a decent living for themselves. Then, in September 1912, everything changed. A young white woman named Mae Crow claimed she had been assaulted. Despite a complete lack of evidence, suspicion immediately fell on the black community. 3 young black men were arrested: Rob Edwards, Oscar Daniel, and Ernest Knox. Before any trial could take place, a lynch mob broke Rob Edwards out of jail and hanged him from a telephone pole. Oscar Daniel was also lynched shortly after. Ernest Knox, only 16 years old, was given a rushed trial and sentenced to death, though he was later granted life in prison after northern newspapers raised questions about the fairness of his conviction. But the violence didn't stop with the lynchings. In the weeks and months that followed, white residents of Forsyth County formed what became known as the Night Riders, groups of armed men who went from house to house in the black community, forcing residents to sign over their property deeds and leave or face death. Over the course of just a few years, 98% of Oscarville's black residents either fled or were murdered. More than 1,100 people lost their livelihoods, their homes, and their community. Black property deeds mysteriously found their way into the hands of white neighbors without any bill of sale or transfer, allowing the theft of generational wealth. Oscarville, once a thriving black town, became a ghost town. Decades passed, the stolen land changed hands, and by the 1940s, the federal government had its eyes on the region. Atlanta was growing rapidly and needed fresh water. The solution was to dam the Chattahoochee River and create a massive reservoir. Congressional approval came in 1946 with the River and Harbors Act, and Congress appropriated $45 million for the project. The government began purchasing land from hundreds of families, including what remained of Oscarville. The Army Corps of Engineers broke ground for Buford Dam on March 1st, 1950. The construction took 7 years and involved enormous amounts of work. To prepare the land for flooding, the Corps demolished or moved anything they considered dangerous. Roads, bridges, and some trees were left behind, as was the old Gainesville Speedway. During a severe drought in 2007, the racetrack's concrete stadium seating breached the surface as if it had been dug up in an archaeological excavation. Some 700 families sold a total of 56,000 acres to the government. At first, the government assured landowners they were being paid fair value for their land and buildings, but residents found it hard to price generations of memories, hard work, and deep roots. A host of emotions accompanied the talk of relocation: anger, resentment, fear, anxiety, bewilderment, and apprehension. To them, their land was priceless. Some families later regretted their decision once they realized they couldn't survive on what the government offered, but by then, it was too late. On February 1st, 1956, 1 month short of 6 years after groundbreaking, the dam was closed for the first time. Lake Lanier began to fill gradually over the next several years. As the water rose, locals jammed roads and bridges to watch as history vanished before their eyes. Whatever they had abandoned was covered by the rising waters. It took between 3 to 5 years for the lake to reach its full capacity at 1071 feet above sea level. By that time, most signs of past human habitation had been drowned long before. But the Corps of Engineers didn't relocate all the graves. Russell, a local historian and author of Underwater Ghost Towns of North Georgia, believes that unmarked graves were left behind because they were not easily identified, and there was no family to claim them. During droughts, when the lake's water levels drop, submerged roads, foundations, and other artifacts are exposed, silent testaments to the communities that once were. One explanation for Lake Lanier's unusually high death toll lies beneath the surface. Debris and rubble from before the lake's construction, along with everything from sunken boats to lawn chairs to fishing wire, create a treacherous underwater obstacle course. Coupled with the lake's low visibility, rescue operations become extremely dangerous. Divers have reported feeling body parts in the lake during their many excursions. One longtime diver told local media, "You reach out into the dark and you feel an arm or a leg and it doesn't move." Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, there's no denying that Lake Lanier carries a heavy history. The displacement of entire communities, the racial violence of 1912, the unmarked graves, and the continuing deaths all contribute to a sense that something about this place isn't quite right. To the historian Lisa Russell, the changes wrought by the human-made lake are scarier than any spooky folklore. A haunting is sometimes defined as something that is difficult to ignore or forget, something that is poignant and evocative, she said. The real haunting in this story is how history has made it impossible to ignore what was done to the land in North Georgia. Once a land of wild rivers, North Georgia is now broken with dams and human-made bodies of water that change the ecosystem. Once a land that belonged to indigenous people, it is now buried under the water, making recovery of lost culture impossible. Today, Lake Lanier has about 625 billion gallons of water, the equivalent of 950,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. It's one of the most visited core-built lakes in the nation, with about 12 million visitors annually. Margaritaville at Lanier Islands opened on the lake, and the beach draws huge crowds in summer. But some locals refuse to enter the water, and as one Atlanta resident put it, "I haven't been in 15 years. Once I learned the truth about the lake, I couldn't bring myself back to that place." The legends persist. People report strange happenings, unexplained drownings, and ghostly sightings. But the truth is, you don't need to believe in ghosts to be haunted by Lake Lanier. The real ghosts are the ones we refuse to acknowledge, the history we'd rather keep buried beneath the water where we don't have to look at it. Moving from Georgia to Virginia, we encounter another legend that blurs the line between folklore and documented fact. The story begins with a dare, as so many urban legends do, but this one has police reports, newspaper articles, and decades of eyewitness accounts to back it up. On October 21st, 1970, Air Force Academy cadet Robert Bennett was in his car with his fiancée near the Colchester Overpass in Clifton, Virginia. It was around midnight, and they'd stopped on the 5,400 block of Guinea Road near Bennett's uncle's house. Suddenly, a man dressed in a white suit with long bunny ears appeared out of the darkness. He began shouting at the couple, accusing them of trespassing on private property and claiming he had their license plate number and would report them to police. Then, without warning, he threw a wood-handled hatchet through the front car window. The hatchet barely missed both Bennett and his fiancée. Terrified, they sped away, driving directly to the Fairfax County Police Station with the hatchet still embedded in their car. When they filed their report, officers took the case seriously, but with only the hatchet for evidence and no clear leads, the investigation stalled. Then, less than 2 weeks later, on Halloween night, October 31st, the bunny man showed up again. Private security guard Paul Phillips spotted a man on the front porch of a new but unoccupied house about a block away from the first incident. The man was holding an axe and was dressed in gray, black, and white, including what appeared to be bunny ears. Phillips approached and started talking to him. That's when he started chopping, Phillips later told police. Taking several swings at a porch post, the man in the bunny suit threatened Phillips. "All you people trespass around here. If you come any closer, I'll chop off your head." Phillips backed away to his car to retrieve his handgun, but by the time he returned, the rabbit had fled into the woods. Over the next 6 months, teenagers and children throughout Northern Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. reported sightings of the bunny man. Fairfax County Police investigated extensively, but never identified the culprit. By spring of 1971, the sighting stopped, and the case was closed. Officer W.L. Johnson, who handled the investigation, wrote in his official report, "After a very extensive investigation into this, and all other cases of this same nature, it is still unsubstantiated as to whether or not there really is a white rabbit." Upon interviewing everyone in this case that may have had any knowledge of any incidents concerning a white rabbit, there has been no significant information uncovered that would lead to the identity of the person or persons that were posing as a white rabbit. This case will be marked as inactive. But that was just the beginning. In 1973, a University of Maryland student named Patricia Johnson submitted a research paper that chronicled precisely 54 variations on the 2 documented incidents. Many maintained the basic plot, but varied in details like location and specific events. Some versions even mentioned the bunny man committing murders, a detail completely at odds with the actual police reports. The most widely circulated version of the story emerged online in 1999, posted to a website called Castle of Spirits by a user named Timothy J. Forbes. According to this version, which has since been thoroughly debunked, the Bunny Man was a convict named Douglas J. Griffin, who escaped while being transported from an insane asylum in 1904. The bus carrying the convicts crashed near a railroad overpass, and all the prisoners escaped. During the search, police found dead rabbits hanging from trees and the body of one convict. Griffin, however, remained at large. Then, on Halloween night, a group of teenagers were found hanging from the overpass, their throats slashed and bodies disemboweled. This pattern supposedly continued every Halloween for years. Fairfax County archivist Brian Conley investigated this version extensively and found it to be completely fabricated. There were no such murders in county records, no asylum in the area during that time period, and key institutions mentioned in the story, such as the Old Clifton Library allegedly used as a source, never existed. Yet the story spread like wildfire across the internet, becoming the official version that most people know today. So what really happened? To this day, no one knows who the Bunny Man was or what motivated him. Conley speculates it could have been related to an elderly man who owned property in the area and was known as something of a curmudgeon. The man had died a year or two before the incidents, so perhaps a younger family member took up his cause of chasing away trespassers. Another theory suggests the Bunny Man was protesting the rapid development happening in the region at that time. If the Bunny Man was in his early 20s in 1970, he would still be alive today, unless he got careless with his hatchet, as Conley joked. But no one has ever come forward to admit being the notorious Bunny Man. The story has become deeply embedded in Northern Virginia culture. The simple one-lane concrete tunnel in Clifton, now known as Bunny Man Bridge, has become a popular destination for teenagers and paranormal enthusiasts, especially around Halloween. Starting in 2003, local authorities began controlling access to the area during Halloween to manage the crowds. The town of Clifton has embraced the legend, with local shops selling Bunny Man t-shirts and souvenirs, and there's even a brewery named after the urban legend. While many dismiss the story as folklore, the documented police reports from 1970 prove that someone, somewhere, was indeed terrorizing people while dressed in a bunny costume and wielding sharp weapons. Whether he was a disturbed individual, a property owner defending his land, or simply someone who took Halloween way too seriously, we may never know. But the Bunny Man was real, even if the elaborate mythology built up around him wasn't. Today, the story of the Bunny Man has overtaken the actual truth. There was no murder, no asylum for the insane, and not even technically a bridge, just a railroad overpass. Yet the legend persists, a testament to how quickly truth can be obscured by fiction, and how a few documented incidents can snowball into an elaborate myth that takes on a life of its own. Our next legend takes us from the woods of Virginia to the rural farmlands of Kentucky, where in 1955, a family experienced something so bizarre, so terrifying, that it would become one of the most significant and well-documented cases in UFO history. On the evening of August 21st, 1955, Billy Ray Taylor went out to the Sutton family well to get some water. It was around 7 in the evening, and the summer heat still lingered in the air. Suddenly, he saw something that made him freeze. A large, silvery object streaked across the sky, real bright, with an exhaust all the colors of the rainbow. He claimed it passed over the farmhouse, abruptly stopped, and then descended behind some trees in a nearby gully, about a city block away. Taylor rushed back inside and told the 11 other people gathered at the Sutton farmhouse what he'd seen. 5 adults and 7 children were spending a quiet Sunday evening together, playing cards and enjoying each other's company. When Taylor burst in with his story, they laughed it off. They assumed he'd probably seen a shooting star or a meteor, nothing to get excited about. But within minutes, the family dog began barking frantically, followed by a series of strange, unidentifiable noises outside. Billy Ray Taylor and Carl Lucky Sutton grabbed their guns and went outside to investigate. What happened next would either go down as one of the most credible extraterrestrial encounters in American history or one of the strangest cases of mass hysteria ever documented. According to their accounts, a small creature between 3 and 4 feet tall emerged from the darkness, walking toward them with its hands raised as if surrendering. The witnesses later described the being as having large glowing eyes that emitted a yellowish light, a long thin slit for a mouth, huge ears, thin short legs, and hands ending in sharp talons. The creature's body was silver gray and seemed to give off an eerie shimmer in the moonlight. When the thing got closer, Taylor and Sutton raised their weapons and fired. The creature did a backflip and retreated into the darkness. But it didn't stay gone. Over the next several hours, multiple creatures appeared at the windows of the house. Someone inside claimed one reached through and touched their hair. The 2 men fired repeatedly, sometimes hitting the creatures, but the beings seemed impervious to bullets. When shots did connect, witnesses said it sounded like bullets hitting a metal can. The creatures would tumble backward when hit, but then scurry away, apparently unharmed. This siege continued for nearly 4 hours. The creatures kept appearing, the men kept shooting, and the rest of the family huddled inside in terror. At one point, Sutton shot at a creature that had climbed onto the roof. Another appeared on a tree branch extending over the house. They seemed to be trying to get inside, circling the building and peering into windows. Finally, around 11 p.m., the terrified families decided they'd had enough. All 11 people, including the children, piled into 2 vehicles and made a mad dash for the Hopkinsville police station. When they burst into the station, frantic and nearly incoherent, the duty officer knew something serious had happened. These weren't drunk teenagers or attention seekers. These were respectable families, including women and children, and they were genuinely terrified. 4 city police officers, 5 state troopers, 3 deputy sheriffs, and 4 military police officers from nearby Fort Campbell immediately drove to the Sutton farmhouse. What they found was strange indeed. The house showed obvious signs of a battle. The screen door was torn. Bullet holes riddled the walls. 4 boxes of spent ammunition were scattered around, evidence that a significant amount of gunfire had occurred. But there were no bodies, no blood, no physical evidence of the creatures the families described. The police searched the farmhouse, the surrounding woods, and the fields. They found nothing. However, some of the responding officers reported observing unusual lights in the sky in the vicinity around the time of the encounter, adding another layer of intrigue to the case. The next day, the story hit the newspapers. The Kentucky New Era was the first to report the incident, initially stating there were 12 to 15 creatures, a number that continues to be most often reported. Reporters descended on the small farmhouse, and the Suttons found themselves at the center of a media circus. Skeptics immediately dismissed the story as a hoax, or the result of too much moonshine. But investigators who spoke with the witnesses came away convinced that something had genuinely frightened these people. Ufologist Alan Hendry wrote that, "This case is distinguished by its duration and also by the number of witnesses involved. All 7 adults told the same story with no contradictory evidence in their statements. Sketches of the creatures based on descriptions from different witnesses matched closely. Their stories remained unwavering when a thorough investigation was conducted a year later by researcher Isabel Davis. J. Allen Hynek, the noted astronomer and UFO researcher, took the story seriously and discussed the case with investigators who'd interviewed the families. Project Blue Book, the U.S. Air Force's official UFO investigation program, listed the case as a hoax with no further comment. But many researchers found this dismissal unsatisfactory, especially given the number of credible witnesses and the consistency of their accounts. No evidence of a hoax has ever been revealed, and members of the Sutton family continue to insist their account was true for the rest of their lives. So what really happened that night in Kelly, Kentucky? Skeptics have offered several explanations. The most popular theory is that the family encountered great horned owls. These birds are nocturnal, have glowing eyes that reflect light, will aggressively defend their territory, and can appear human-like in their movements. They're also most active in the hour after dusk, almost exactly when the encounter occurred. In the darkness, with adrenaline pumping and imagination running wild, it's possible the families could have mistaken owls for aliens. Another theory suggests the witnesses were intoxicated, though investigators found no evidence of excessive drinking. Some have speculated about mass hysteria, where one person's fear spreads to the group, causing everyone to perceive threats that aren't really there. Yet this explanation doesn't account for the consistency of the descriptions or the fact that multiple people saw the same things at different times throughout the evening. The Kelly-Hopkinsville case has had a lasting impact on popular culture. Steven Spielberg used the event as inspiration for his unproduced film, Night Skies, and drew on it while developing E.T. the Extraterrestrial. The design of the Pokemon Sableye is inspired by the description of the Hopkinsville goblins. The case has been featured in countless books, documentaries, and television shows. Today, the town celebrates Little Green Men Days every August, embracing its place in UFO lore. Geraldine Sutton Stith, the daughter of Lucky Sutton, has spent her life defending her family's account. "There are millions of stars and planets in the universe," she said. "I can't possibly believe ours is the only planet with life." The remaining survivors of the encounter refuse to talk about the incident, so Stith does it for them, keeping the story alive and insisting that what her family experienced that night was real, whether it was aliens, owls, or something else entirely. The Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter remains one of the most intriguing, unsolved mysteries in American history, and unlike many urban legends, this one has the distinction of being thoroughly documented, investigated, and corroborated by multiple witnesses whose lives were forever changed by what they saw or thought they saw on that August night in 1955. From the farmlands of Kentucky, we traveled to the small town of Bladenboro, North Carolina, where in the winter of 1953 and 1954, something began killing animals in ways that defied explanation and left an entire community living in fear. It started quietly enough. On December 29, 1953, a local woman heard her neighbor's dogs barking and whimpering. When she went out to investigate, she saw a large cat-like creature skulk off into the darkness. 2 days later, on New Year's Eve, Bladenboro Police Chief Roy Forrest was called out to the farm of Woody Storm. 2 of Storm's dogs had been killed by something large and powerful, their bodies completely drained of blood. The skulls were crushed, ears chewed, and the corpses bore signs of incredible violence. More reports started coming in. D.G. Pate said he watched from his service station as a dog was attacked by a large creature and dragged into the woods. The kills all had the same characteristics: crushed skulls, blood drained from the bodies, and wounds that suggested something with powerful jaws and claws. Whatever was responsible was methodical and brutal, killing quickly and efficiently. By early January, the attacks were happening almost nightly. Witnesses began describing the creature. It was about 4 to 5 feet long, dark or black in color, cat-like but incredibly powerful. Some said it resembled a bear, others a panther or cougar. One local described it as about 20 inches high, bushy, and looked like it could have been a lion or a wildcat. Another person heard strange noises in the night, like a baby crying, or a woman screaming and a panther's cry all at once. Then, on January 5th, 1954, the beast of Bladenboro did something it hadn't done before. It attacked a human. Mrs. C.E. Kinslaw heard the sound of whimpering dogs outside her house that evening. She went outside to investigate and saw a large cat-like creature rushing toward her. She screamed and her husband rushed outside. The beast was frightened off and fled back into the woods, but the damage was done. People were no longer just worried about their pets and livestock. They were worried about their children. The story hit the newspapers, and within days, Bladenboro was overwhelmed. Hunters came from as far away as Tennessee, eager to bag the beast and claim fame. By January 6th, more than 800 people descended on the small town, all armed and ready to hunt. A fully armed pack of fraternity brothers from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill made their way down to Bladenboro, hoping to mount the beast's head on their wall. Professional hunters were brought in. Locals formed organized search parties, sweeping through the woods and swamps in military-style formations. The chaos was getting dangerous. Mayor Woodrow Bob Fussell and Chief Forrest realized they had a problem. While having a monster roaming the woods might be dangerous, having 1,000 frazzled townsfolk all armed and ready to shoot was far more frightening. On January 6th, Forrest had planned to use dogs tied to trees as bait to lure the creature out. But the plan was scrapped when the local Humane Society protested. The hunts were becoming increasingly reckless, with hunters firing at shadows and sounds in the night. Finally, on January 13th, 1954, a local farmer named Luther Davis found a large bobcat struggling in one of his traps. He shot the cat and immediately contacted Mayor Fussell, who came down for a photo opportunity with the animal, declaring that the beast of Bladenboro had finally been defeated. But there was a problem with this narrative. The bobcat, while large, wasn't nearly big enough to match many of the descriptions given by witnesses. And it certainly didn't explain one of the most puzzling aspects of the case: the complete drainage of blood from the victims. Bobcats, cougars, and other wild felines do hunt dogs and other animals, but they don't typically drain their prey of blood. They eat meat. The vampire-like nature of the kills suggested something else, something that didn't fit with known predator behavior. Yet after the bobcat was killed, the attacks largely stopped. A few days later, on January 13th, Bruce Soules from a nearby town hit a cat with his vehicle as he was leaving Bladenboro. According to reports, it was spotted like a leopard, about 20 to 24 inches high, and weighed between 75 and 90 pounds. This animal was much larger and more consistent with the witness descriptions. So did Bladenboro actually have a beast? Or was the whole thing exaggerated? A case of small-town hysteria blown out of proportion by a mayor who knew how to work the media? It's worth noting that Mayor Woodrow Fussell, who operated the town theater, was something of a showman. He was the one who first called the newspapers about the attacks. He was the one who organized hunts and invited reporters, and he later admitted, "A little publicity never hurt a small town." Years later, Fussell confessed that he believed the beast was 10% real, 90% imagination. He'd never anticipated how out of control the situation would get. The story had hit the papers during a slow news week, getting far more attention than expected. But Fussell's publicity stunt, if that's what it was, worked. Bladenboro became famous, and the legend of the beast lived on. A local man named Dick Hilburn, a talented artist and one-armed sign painter, saw an opportunity and began producing license plates and other memorabilia with the vampire beast painted on them. He had no trouble selling them to the scores of hunters who had descended on the town. The Beast of Bladenboro was becoming a brand. Over the decades, occasional reports have surfaced of large cat-like animals in the region. In the 1970s, farmers reported mysterious livestock killings. In 2004, a woman claimed to see a cougar-sized feline cross the road near Bladenboro. In 2014, several goats were found dead and drained of blood, immediately reviving talk of the beast's return. To this day, some locals believe the creature was never caught, that it's still out there in the swamps and forests of southeastern North Carolina. The town has fully embraced its monster. Every October, Bladenboro hosts Beast Fest, an annual festival featuring live music, food vendors, storytelling, and beast-themed merchandise. While the festival is lighthearted, it keeps the memory and the mystery alive. The Beast of Bladenboro continues to fascinate because it sits in the perfect space between the believable and the unbelievable. Was it a panther, a bobcat, an escaped exotic animal, or something else? Was it exaggerated for publicity? Or was there really a vampire cat terrorizing small-town North Carolina? What we know for certain is that something killed animals in Bladenboro during the winter of 1953 and 54. The kills were real, the blood was real, and the fear was real. Whether the creature was supernatural, a misidentified predator, or simply a convenient legend created by a clever mayor, the Beast of Bladenboro has secured its place in the annals of American cryptozoology. And like all the best legends, the truth remains just out of reach, lurking in the shadows where monsters are born. Speaking of things lurking in unexpected places, let's travel west to New Mexico, where the desert sand conceals one of the strangest true legends in gaming history. This tale involves not a monster or a ghost, but something far more prosaic, yet somehow just as mythical: a graveyard of video games. In 1982, Atari was the undisputed king of video games. The company dominated the home console market with its Atari 2600 system, and every game they released seemed to print money. So when Steven Spielberg's movie E.T. the Extraterrestrial became the highest-grossing film of all time, Atari saw an opportunity. They paid a reported $20 million to $25 million for the rights to create a video game based on the film, an astronomical sum at the time. But there was a problem. To get the game into stores by Christmas, they needed it completed fast. Developer Howard Scott Warshaw was given just 5.5 weeks to create the game, instead of the normal 6 to 9 months typically needed. Warshaw, to his credit, delivered a functioning game in that impossibly short time frame. But the result was, in the kind words of critics, not good. The game was confusing, frustrating, and nearly unplayable. E.T. wandered around a blocky, pixelated world, falling into pits repeatedly while trying to collect pieces of a telephone to phone home. Atari, confident in the movie's popularity, had manufactured approximately 5 million cartridges. They needed to sell about 4 million just to break even on the licensing costs. Instead, the game was a disaster. While over 1 million customers initially bought the game, many returned it, and retailers sent back massive quantities of unsold stock. Atari found itself with millions of unsold, unwanted cartridges taking up warehouse space. The failure of E.T., combined with a flooded market of poor-quality games, contributed significantly to the video game crash of 1983, an industry-wide collapse that bankrupted numerous companies and nearly killed home console gaming entirely. In desperate need of warehouse space and facing financial ruin, Atari made a decision. They would bury the unsold games. In September 1983, the Alamogordo Daily News of Alamogordo, New Mexico, reported that between 10 and 20 semi-trailer truckloads of Atari boxes, cartridges, and systems from an El Paso, Texas storehouse were being crushed and buried at the city landfill. The landfill was chosen specifically because scavenging was not allowed and garbage was crushed and buried nightly. On September 27, 1983, the UPI News Service reported that witnesses said the operation included cartridges of E.T., Pac-Man, and other Atari games. Atari official Bruce Enton stated the company was mostly sending broken and returned material to the Alamogordo dump, claiming it was, by and large, inoperable stuff. But an anonymous workman later contradicted this, suggesting the burial included mostly new cartridges. To ensure no one could dig up the games, cement was poured over the compacted waste. The worker explained, "There are dead animals down there. We wouldn't want any children to get hurt digging in the dump." The city of Alamogordo eventually began protesting the large amount of dumping Atari was doing, with one commissioner stating the area did not want to become an industrial waste dump for El Paso. The local manager ordered an end to the dumping shortly afterward. Alamogordo later passed an Emergency Management Act and created an Emergency Management Task Force to limit the future flexibility of the garbage contractor to secure outside business for monetary purposes. Mayor Henry Pacelli commented, "We do not want to see something like this happen again." For decades, the Atari burial became the stuff of legend in gaming circles. The story was told and retold, growing more elaborate with each telling. Some claimed millions of cartridges were buried. Others said prototypes of unreleased games and hardware were included. The cement layer added a dramatic flourish to the tale. But over time, as no physical evidence surfaced, and Atari officials remained largely silent, many began to believe it was just an urban legend, a myth that had grown out of the video game crash but wasn't actually real. Skeptics pointed out that it made no economic sense to bury perfectly good merchandise. They questioned why a company would go to such extremes. The lack of photographic evidence from 1983 was suspicious. As the years passed and the internet age arrived, the Atari burial was frequently listed alongside other gaming myths and legends, dismissed as likely false despite the original newspaper reports. Then, in May 2013, the Alamogordo City Commission granted Fuel Industries, a Canadian entertainment company, 6 months of access to the landfill to film a documentary and excavate the site. The documentary, titled Atari Game Over, was planned as an exclusive for Xbox One and Xbox 360. Though the excavation was momentarily stalled due to complaints about potential hazards, the issues were resolved in early April 2014. On April 26, 2014, excavation began. Film crews, archaeologists, game historians, and curious locals converged on the Alamogordo landfill. Microsoft and Xbox Entertainment Studios funded the dig, treating it as a legitimate archaeological expedition. Professional archaeologists from institutions, including the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, were brought in to document everything properly. This wasn't a treasure hunt. This was history being unearthed. And then it happened. The excavators struck buried cartridges. The first copy of E.T. pulled from the landfill was in remarkably good shape, aside from a few dents. It was real. The legend was true. Over the course of one day of digging, approximately 1,300 cartridges were recovered, along with other Atari hardware. The games included not just E.T., but also Centipede, Space Invaders, Asteroids, and other titles from the 2600 catalog. For Howard Scott Warshaw, the man who created E.T. in just 5.5 weeks all those years ago, the excavation was emotional. "The experience I had making the game was awesome," he said, watching the dig. "This is intense. It's just fabulous because I still feel like, look at all this excitement that's been generated today over something I did 32 years ago." The Alamogordo City Council later auctioned 880 of the recovered cartridges for more than $107,000. Some copies of E.T. sold for over $1,500 each. The city kept 300 cartridges in reserve for future sales, aware of the historical value they had acquired. The Smithsonian Institution obtained a copy for its collection, recognizing the burial as a significant moment in technology and cultural history. The documentary Atari Game Over was released and told the full story of the video game crash, the E.T. game's creation, and the burial. It explored how Atari's hubris and poor business practices led to the crash, while also examining the human element. The people who worked at Atari, who created the games, and who witnessed the industry collapse, all had stories to tell. Today, the verified Atari burial serves as a cautionary tale about overconfidence, poor planning, and the dangers of rushing creative products to market. But it's also a reminder that sometimes urban legends are rooted in truth. For 30 years, people dismissed the story as myth. Gamers debated whether it was real. Skeptics laughed it off. But buried under the New Mexico desert, the evidence waited patiently to prove them all wrong. The Atari burial has left its mark on popular culture, appearing in music videos, novels, and numerous documentaries. The verified cartridges have become collector's items, pieces of authenticated history from gaming's darkest hour. And the story reminds us that sometimes the most unbelievable tales are the ones that turn out to be completely verifiably true. From the deserts of New Mexico, we travel to the mountains of West Virginia, where in 1897, a young woman's death would become the only known case in American legal history, where testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer. Zona Heister was born around 1873 in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. In October 1896, the young woman met a blacksmith named Erasmus Stribling Trout Shoe, though he went by the name Edward and was known as Trout to those who knew him. Her mother, Mary Jane Heister, didn't like him from the moment they met. There was something about the man that set her on edge, a feeling she couldn't quite explain, but couldn't ignore either. What Mary didn't know was that Trout had already been married twice before, and both wives had died under mysterious circumstances. His first wife divorced him after he abandoned her and their child. His second wife, Lucy Ann Tritt, died just 8 months after their marriage in 1894. Trout claimed Lucy had fallen and hit her head on a rock, but few believed him. Before any action could be taken, he'd packed up and left the area. By the fall of 1896, he'd arrived in Greenbrier County, looking for a fresh start. Despite her mother's misgivings, Zona fell in love with the charming blacksmith. They married on October 20th, 1896, at the Old Methodist Church. Zona wore a high-collared burgundy-colored dress, the same dress that would later play a significant role in the mystery of her death. For a few months, the couple seemed happy, but then Zona fell ill. She was treated by the family doctor and appeared to be recovering. On the cold Saturday afternoon of January 22nd, 1897, Trout went to the home of Martha Jones to request her 11-year-old son, Anderson, do some chores for Zona, including picking up eggs. The boy was busy helping Dr. Knapp with odd jobs and couldn't come right away. Trout returned 4 more times to collect the young man, each time appearing more impatient. It was late afternoon before Andy was finally able to get to the Shue home. What he found was horrifying. A trail of blood led to the broken and lifeless body of Zona Shue lying near the bottom of the stairway. The boy ran to fetch his mother, who immediately sent for Dr. Knapp and Trout. But by the time the doctor arrived at the house, Trout had already moved his dead wife's body upstairs, laid her on a bed, and changed her clothing. More strangely, he had dressed her in that high-necked burgundy dress with a stiff collar and wrapped a veil around her neck multiple times. When Dr. Knapp attempted to examine the body, Trout became agitated and insisted the doctor stop. He cradled his wife's head in his hands and sobbed dramatically, making it nearly impossible for the doctor to conduct a proper examination. Knapp did a cursory examination and declared the cause of death to be everlasting faint, or heart failure. Later, he would change this to complications from childbirth, though there was no evidence Zona had been pregnant. Zona's body was taken to her mother's home on Big Sewell Mountain. When the casket was opened for viewing, Trout remained at the head of the casket at all times, that strange collar and veil still wrapped around Zona's neck. When anyone tried to approach too closely or adjust the burial clothes, he became defensive and emotional. The next day, Zona was buried in the little cemetery on the hilltop. Most people assumed it was a tragic but natural death, sad but not suspicious. But Mary Jane Heaster wasn't satisfied. Something didn't feel right about her daughter's death. Within weeks of the burial, Mary began telling neighbors that Zona's spirit had appeared to her, not once, but 4 times, visiting her bedside in the dead of night. According to Mary, Zona appeared wearing the dress she died in and told her mother the truth about what happened. Trout had come home from work in a rage because Zona hadn't cooked meat for supper. In his fury, he had attacked her, grabbing her by the throat and squeezing until he broke her neck. Zona's ghost told her mother that her neck was squeezed off at the first joint, twisted so violently that the injury was catastrophic and immediately fatal. Mary Jane Heaster became convinced her daughter had been murdered. Armed with this information, allegedly provided by Zona's spirit, Mary visited the local prosecutor, John Alfred Preston. She spent several hours in his office, recounting her daughter's ghostly visits and insisting the case needed to be reopened. Whether Preston believed the ghost story or not is unclear, but he had enough doubt to reopen the investigation. Preston dispatched deputies to re-interview people connected to the case, including Dr. Knapp. When Preston himself spoke to Knapp, the doctor admitted he had not made a complete examination of the body, particularly around the neck area where Trout had been so protective. This was viewed as sufficient justification for an exhumation, and an order was issued. On February 22, 1897, Zona's body was exhumed and examined in the local one-room schoolhouse. The autopsy lasted 3 hours. The Greenbrier Independent later reported from Trout Shoe's trial that after Dr. Knapp was unable to initially examine the body properly, Shoe had assisted in dressing the body, and in doing so put around the neck a high collar and a large veil several times folded and tied. The autopsy revealed the truth. Zona's neck had been broken. The windpipe was crushed. Marks on the throat indicated she had been strangled with such force that her neck had been dislocated. The official cause of death was changed to murder by strangulation and a broken neck. An investigation into Shoe's background revealed he had served time in the penitentiary for horse theft and had been married twice before, with both wives dying under strange circumstances. One was supposed to have died from a broken neck when she fell from a haystack. The other died when a rock from a basket Shoe was hoisting up to repair a chimney fell and struck her head. The pattern was becoming clear. Trout Shoe was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. His trial began on June 22, 1897, and Mary Jane Heaster was the prosecution's star witness. The prosecutor, John Alfred Preston, confined his questioning to the known facts of the case, carefully avoiding the issue of ghostly visitations. But Shoe's defense lawyer, perhaps hoping to prove Mary unreliable, questioned her extensively about her daughter's spectral visits. The tactic backfired spectacularly. Mary Jane Heaster would not waver in her account despite intense badgering. "It was no dream," she testified. "She came back and told me that he was mad, that she didn't have no meat cooked for supper. The second night, she told me that her neck was squeezed off at the first joint, and it was just as she told me." Because the defense had introduced the issue of the ghost, the judge found it difficult to instruct the jury to disregard the testimony. Many people in the community seemed to believe Mary's story. As one local writer later noted, the real Charlie No-Face was actually one of the kindest human beings on the face of this earth, despite his horrible disfigurement, a fact shared by those who knew him but nearly lost under decades of hyperbole. The jury took just 1 hour to return a verdict. Trout Shoe was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. The Greenbrier Independent reported that though the evidence was entirely circumstantial, the verdict meets general approval. A lynch mob formed to take Shoe from the jail and hang him, but the mob was dispersed by the deputy sheriff before any violence occurred. However, the Greenbrier Ghost was never mentioned by the prosecution and officially played no part in the case against Shoe. The conviction was based on the physical evidence uncovered during the autopsy and the suspicious circumstances surrounding Zona's death. But there's no denying that Mary Jane Heaster's insistence that her daughter's ghost had revealed the truth is what prompted the exhumation and investigation in the first place. Shoe died in the 3rd year of his sentence during the flu epidemic of 1900. No one from his family came to claim his body. As for Zona, her grave can still be visited today in the Soul Chapel Methodist Cemetery. A tombstone marks her resting place with the inscription, "In memory of Zona Heaster Shue, Greenbrier Ghost, 1876 to 1897. A state highway marker near the Sam Black Church exit of Interstate 64 in West Virginia commemorates the site. It reads, "Interred in a nearby cemetery is Zona Heaster Shue." Her death in 1897 was presumed natural until her spirit appeared to her mother to describe how she was killed by her husband Edward. Autopsy on the exhumed body verified the apparition's account. Edward, found guilty of murder, was sentenced to state prison. Some historians and researchers have suggested Mary Jane Heaster likely made up the ghost story to give weight to her suspicions and to appeal to the superstitions of her mountain community. Katie Letcher Lyle, who wrote extensively about the case, believed Mary knew Trout was dangerous and feared he might kill again if not stopped. By claiming the information came directly from Zona's ghost, Mary could appeal to local beliefs and generate public attention that would force authorities to act. Whether the ghost was real or a clever fabrication, the story of the Greenbrier Ghost remains unique in American legal history. It's the only case where supernatural testimony played any role in a murder conviction, even if only indirectly. The case has inspired plays, musicals, novels, and even episodes of television shows. The story continues to captivate those interested in the intersection of folklore, crime, and justice. The Greenbrier Ghost serves as a reminder that sometimes mothers know. Whether through supernatural means or simple intuition, Mary Jane Heaster knew something was wrong with her daughter's death, and she refused to let it go. In doing so, she ensured that Zona Heaster Shue's murder didn't go unpunished, and that her daughter's story would be remembered long after both had passed from this world. Now we journey across the Atlantic to Scotland, to a cluster of remote, windswept islands 20 miles off the northwest coast in the Outer Hebrides. The Flannan Isles, also known as the Seven Hunters, are desolate crags of rock pounded by waves and teeming with seabirds, but otherwise forsaken by human habitation. In December 1900, these islands became the site of one of maritime history's most baffling mysteries. The Flannan Isles lighthouse had been completed just the year before, in 1899. Built 215 feet above sea level, it was designed by David Allen Stevenson for the Northern Lighthouse Board. The lighthouse was a critical safety beacon for ships navigating the treacherous waters around Scotland's western coast. It required constant attention from its keepers, who worked in rotations, spending weeks at a time on the isolated island. On December 7, 1900, 3 men took up their posts at the lighthouse. James Ducat, 43, was the principal keeper, an experienced lighthouse man who had served at various stations for over 20 years. Thomas Marshall, 28, served as second assistant, while Donald MacArthur, 40, was an occasional keeper filling in for William Ross, who was on sick leave. MacArthur was described as a strong, quick-tempered man, but also a devoted family man. All 3 were considered reliable, experienced keepers who knew their duties and the dangers of their isolated post. From December 7th through the 15th, watchers on the Isle of Lewis, 16 miles to the east, noted that the lighthouse beam appeared to falter and then fail completely. On December 15th, the steamer Arctur passed the Flannan Isles, and the captain noted in his log that the light was not functioning. This was highly unusual. Lighthouse keepers took their responsibilities seriously, knowing that ships depended on their vigilance. An unlit lighthouse was a potentially deadly situation. Due to bad weather and the Christmas holiday, a relief vessel couldn't reach the island until December 26th. The ship Hesperus, captained by James Harvey, finally arrived at Eilean Moor on Boxing Day. When the ship approached, the crew found the lighthouse completely dark. No flag flew from the pole, which should have been raised if there was an emergency. Captain Harvey sounded the ship's horn multiple times. No response. He ordered a rocket fired into the air. Still nothing. Finally, Harvey sent the relief keeper, Joseph Moore, ashore in a small boat. Moore approached the lighthouse with an overwhelming sense of foreboding. Something felt terribly wrong. When he reached the building, he found the entrance gate closed but not locked. The door to the kitchen and storeroom was also closed, but when he pushed inside, the kitchen door stood open. Moore stepped into the kitchen and immediately noticed the fireplace was cold. The fire hadn't been lit for days. He moved through the rooms in succession, finding the beds empty, made up as if the keepers had left them in the early morning. There was no sign of the three men, no note, no indication of where they'd gone or what had happened. Moore didn't take time to search further. He knew something serious had occurred. He rushed back to the Hesperus and reported his findings to Captain Harvey. Harvey immediately ordered Moore to return to the lighthouse with buoymaster Alan MacDonald and 2 seamen. Together, they conducted a more thorough search. What they found only deepened the mystery. The lighthouse itself was in perfect order. The lamp was clean and ready to be lit. The blinds were drawn. Pots and pans were scrubbed clean. The beds were neatly made. Everything was as it should be, except for the complete absence of the 3 keepers. Outside, however, there were signs of disturbance. On the western side of the island, which faced the open Atlantic, they found evidence of severe storm damage. Iron railings near the landing had been ripped away. Equipment that should have been secured was missing. A large storage box that held ropes had been wrenched from its position. Most remarkably, massive boulders weighing more than a ton had been moved from their positions. Inside the lighthouse, they found 2 sets of oilskins, the heavy weather gear keepers wore when going outside. But one set was missing. The clock in the lighthouse had stopped. And most puzzling of all, in the kitchen, a meal appeared to have been prepared but never eaten. The table was set, food was laid out, but the men had vanished before they could take a single bite. On December 29th, Superintendent Robert Muirhead of the Northern Lighthouse Board arrived to investigate. He examined everything carefully, including the lighthouse log. The last official entry was from December 13th. However, there were notes up to December 15th detailing the time the light was extinguished and various mechanical readings. This, together with the prepared meal, led investigators to conclude the men had been in the lighthouse until the afternoon of December 15th. But it was the earlier log entries that proved most disturbing. The logbook contained several entries that seemed oddly emotional for routine lighthouse records. One entry described a severe storm, though no storm had been reported in the area on that date. The entry claimed Duckett was quiet, MacArthur was crying, and later, all 3 men were praying together. These were experienced keepers who wouldn't be rattled by typical storms. For them to be so frightened suggested something extraordinary had occurred. Muirhead concluded that, due to the severe storm damage on the western side of the island, the men must have left the lighthouse to secure equipment that was in danger of being washed away. While doing so, they were likely struck by an unexpected large wave and swept into the sea. The official report noted that the evidence supports the conclusion that the men were at the E landing when they met their fate. But this explanation left many questions unanswered. Why would all 3 men leave the lighthouse simultaneously, breaking the strict rule that at least one keeper must always remain inside? Why was one keeper not wearing his oilskin? If they went out during a storm, why wasn't the 3rd keeper inside to help or raise an alarm? And most puzzling, Why did the log entries describe a storm on dates when no storm had been reported? There were also discrepancies regarding the storm itself. While severe weather had indeed struck the area, the worst storms came on December 17th and 18th, after the men were already missing. The dates in the logbook entries describing the storm didn't match with recorded weather patterns. Local residents on Lewis would certainly have noticed a storm severe enough to move 1-ton boulders, but no such storm was reported during the critical days. Alternative theories quickly emerged. Some suggested the keepers had gotten into a fight, with one killing the others and then committing suicide by jumping into the sea. Others proposed that 2 keepers went out to secure equipment, were swept away, and the third keeper, in a fit of grief or guilt, threw himself after them. More fantastical theories involved sea monsters, foreign spies, or supernatural forces. The islands themselves had a dark reputation. Named for St. Flannan, local fishermen had long avoided the Flannan Isles, muttering about wee folk and vengeful spirits. Superstition ran deep in Scottish maritime culture, and many believed the islands were cursed. When 3 experienced keepers vanished without a trace, these old superstitions seemed suddenly plausible. The disappearance inspired numerous artistic works. In 1912, poet Wilfred Wilson Gibson wrote Flannan Isle, a poem that imagined the search for the missing keepers. In 1979, composer Peter Maxwell Davies created a chamber opera called The Lighthouse, based on the story. The 2018 film, The Vanishing, starring Gerard Butler, offered a dark, fictional explanation involving greed, paranoia, and murder. In recent years, naturalist John Love, author of A Natural History of Lighthouses, proposed what may be the most plausible explanation. Love noted that Thomas Marshall had previously been fined 5 shillings for negligence after equipment was washed away during a gale. The keepers may have been determined not to repeat this mistake. Love theorized that 2 keepers went down to the landing to secure equipment during rough seas, while the third remained in the lighthouse as required. While securing the equipment, a freak wave, known as a rogue wave, struck without warning, sweeping both men into the sea. The third keeper, hearing the commotion or realizing his companions were in trouble, rushed out without his oilskin and was also swept away when another wave hit. This theory accounts for most of the evidence. It explains why 2 sets of oilskins were present, but one was missing. It explains why the lighthouse was left in good order, as the men expected to return quickly. It even explains the emotional log entries, if we accept that the keepers had been unusually anxious about weather conditions after the previous incident involving lost equipment. Yet questions remain. Why weren't any bodies ever recovered? The strong currents around the Flannan Isles could have carried them far out to sea, but one might expect at least one body to wash ashore eventually. The strange log entries describing a storm that didn't match recorded weather patterns continue to puzzle researchers, and the eerie timing with the men vanishing sometime on December 15th but not being discovered until December 26th adds to the sense of mystery. The Flannan Isles lighthouse was automated in 1971 and no longer requires permanent keepers. Since then, the island has remained mostly uninhabited except for occasional maintenance visits. The lighthouse still stands, a lonely sentinel on a windswept rock, marking the spot where 3 men vanished into legend. Today, more than a century after the disappearance, the fate of James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur remains unknown. The official explanation of death by drowning seems likely, yet The strange circumstances surrounding their disappearance ensure the case remains one of maritime history's most haunting unsolved mysteries. The three keepers left behind 2 widows and 6 children, families who never received closure, never learned exactly what happened to their loved ones on that December day in 1900. The story of the Flannan Isles keepers reminds us that some mysteries resist solution. Despite thorough investigations, despite decades of speculation and research, despite modern analysis of all available evidence, we still don't know with certainty what happened, and perhaps that's fitting. Some stories are meant to remain mysteries, lingering at the edge of our understanding, reminding us that the world still contains questions we cannot answer. What we do know is this: 3 experienced men, dedicated to their duty of keeping the light burning to guide ships through dangerous waters, disappeared from an isolated lighthouse without a trace. Their story has endured for over a century, capturing imaginations and inspiring countless retellings. And every time a ship passes the Flannan Isles, sailors still look toward that lighthouse and wonder what really happened on that stormy December night when 3 keepers walked into history and vanished forever. We continue our exploration with more verified legends that transformed from whispered tales into documented fact. Deep in the murky waters of Gardner Lake in Connecticut, there's a fully intact house resting on the lake bottom. This isn't speculation or folklore. The Hartford Current confirmed its existence. According to legend, in the 19th century, a family attempted to move their house across the frozen lake during winter. The ice gave way, and the entire structure sank beneath the surface, where it remains to this day. The eerie part? Fishermen report hearing strained musical notes gurgling up to the surface, supposedly from the parlor room piano still inside the sunken house. While we can't verify the ghostly music, the house itself is definitely down there, a testament to the dangers of New England winters and the ambitions of families who thought ice could support the weight of their entire home. In 1993, a Toronto lawyer named Gary Hoy wanted to demonstrate to a group of law students just how strong the glass was in the Toronto Dominion Center. Hoy was a partner at the law firm of Holden Day Wilson, and he'd apparently made this demonstration before without incident. But on July 9th, 1993, something went wrong. Hoy lunged at a window on the 24th floor with his full body weight, intending to bounce off and show how unbreakable the glass was. The glass held, but the frame didn't. The entire window popped out, and Hoy fell 24 stories to his death. As Torontoist reported, the glass didn't technically shatter, just as Hoy had claimed, but it certainly couldn't withstand the impact of a 160-pound man lunging at it. This tragic incident proves that urban legends about bizarre deaths are sometimes exactly what happened. Then there's the legend that was often dismissed as impossible nonsense. The idea that small towns could experience a baby boom because a train whistle woke everyone up at an inconvenient time. The baby train legend claims that a small town had an unusually high birth rate because a train would pass through at 5 a.m. and blow its whistle, waking all the residents. Since it was too late to go back to sleep and too early to get up, couples would, well, find other ways to pass the time. While this specific scenario is hard to verify, the concept isn't as ridiculous as it sounds. Small towns near train lines did experience unusual demographic patterns, and the timing of industrial schedules absolutely affected daily life. Whether any town can definitively trace its baby boom to a 5 a.m. train whistle remains debatable, But it's not the absurd impossibility it seems at first hearing. For decades, New Yorkers heard tales about alligators living in the sewers beneath Manhattan. The story seemed absurd, a perfect example of an urban legend with no basis in fact. But the truth is more interesting. Throughout the early 20th century, wealthy New Yorkers would bring baby alligators home from trips to Florida as exotic pets. When the cute baby gators grew into large, dangerous reptiles, many owners panicked and flushed them down toilets. While it's unlikely that breeding populations of alligators established themselves in New York sewers, alligators have absolutely been found there. In 1935, the New York Times reported that teenagers found an 8-foot alligator in a manhole in Harlem. In later years, additional alligators were discovered. So while the legend of vast colonies of sewer alligators is exaggerated, the core truth that alligators ended up in New York sewers because people flushed them is absolutely real. One of the strangest verified urban legends involves a man, a lawn chair, and 45 helium-filled weather balloons. In 1982, Larry Walters of Los Angeles decided to fulfill a childhood dream of flight. He attached 45 weather balloons to a lawn chair, packed some supplies, and figured he'd float gently a few hundred feet above his neighborhood. Instead, he shot up to 16,000 feet, drifting into the approach corridors for Long Beach Airport. Airline pilots reported seeing him floating past at altitude, sitting calmly in his lawn chair. Walters eventually descended by shooting some of the balloons with a pellet gun, though he got tangled in power lines on the way down. He survived, was fined by the FAA, and became an instant folk hero. The flying lawn chair story sounds like pure fiction, but it's thoroughly documented and absolutely happened. The legend of the cursed VHS tape is usually associated with horror movies like The Ring, but in Council Grove, Kansas, it became an embarrassing reality. According to local legend, the town sheriff accidentally returned a VHS tape to the video rental store. The tape didn't contain a Hollywood movie. It contained intimate footage of the sheriff and his wife. ABC News confirmed this actually happened. The sheriff's accidental swap meant numerous people around town soon learned the most personal details of their local law enforcement leader's private life. Before the internet age, this kind of private video becoming semi-public was the stuff of nightmares. For the sheriff and his wife, it was all too real. These stories, along with the longer legends we've explored tonight, demonstrate a fundamental truth about folklore. Urban legends aren't always false. Sometimes they're exaggerated truths. Sometimes they're completely accurate accounts that sound too bizarre to be real. And sometimes the truth is even stranger than the legend that grew up around it. The line between myth and reality is thinner than we like to believe. We tell stories to make sense of the world, to warn each other about dangers, to explain things we don't understand. But every so often, when you dig beneath the surface of these tales, when you search through old newspapers and police records and historical documents, you find that the impossible actually happened. The unbelievable turns out to be true. Raymond Robinson really did walk the roads of Pennsylvania at night, his tragic disfigurement hidden by darkness, transformed by fear and imagination into the Green Man. Andre Rand really did embody the Cropsey legend, turning a campfire story into a horrifying reality for the families of Staten Island's missing children. The towns beneath Lake Lanier really were drowned, their histories submerged along with their buildings and unmarked graves. The Bunny Man really did terrorize Fairfax County in 1970, throwing hatchets at cars and threatening people with an axe. The Sutton family really did experience something terrifying in Kelly, Kentucky. whether it was aliens or great horned owls. The beast of Bladenboro really did kill animals and frighten an entire North Carolina town. Atari really did bury hundreds of thousands of video games in the New Mexico desert. Zona Heaster-Shu's mother really did provide testimony about her daughter's ghost, leading to the exhumation that proved murder, and 3 lighthouse keepers really did vanish from the Flannan Isles without a trace, leaving behind one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. These aren't just stories anymore. They're documented history, verified facts, proven incidents that started as whispers and ended as truth. They remind us to listen more carefully to the legends we hear, to investigate before dismissing, to recognize that sometimes the most unbelievable tales contain kernels of reality that make them all the more unsettling. The next time you hear an urban legend, a small town story that seems too strange to be true, remember what we've explored tonight. Remember that legends have roots. Remember that folklore often preserves memories of real events passed down through generations until the details blur and the truth becomes almost indistinguishable from fiction. And remember that just because a story sounds impossible doesn't mean it didn't happen. We live in a world far stranger than we usually acknowledge. A world where video game graveyards lie buried beneath desert sand, where ghosts testify in murder trials, where men in bunny costumes terrorize suburban Virginia, and where entire towns rest at the bottom of lakes, their histories drowned but not forgotten. This is the world of small-town legends that turned out to be true, a world where reality and myth dance together in the shadows, and where the only thing more frightening than the legend itself is discovering that it was real all along. If you enjoyed this journey into verified folklore and want to explore more mysteries, legends, and unexplained phenomena, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. Your support helps me continue researching and sharing these fascinating stories with you. And if you have a local legend from your hometown that you think might be true, leave a comment below. Who knows? Your story might be the next one we explore. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, but keep an open mind. Because in a world where lawn chairs fly, video games get buried, and ghosts help solve murders, anything is possible. Sweet dreams, and remember to check under your bed. After all, some monsters are real.